Hi everyone, welcome. Just make sure everyone is making it in. Yes. So welcome to MATChat. This is the brand new webinar series where we talk trust leadership without the fluff or the 90-slide PowerPoint presentation. I'm your host, Laura Williams, an SBL coach and trainer with almost 2 decades of leadership experience in the sector. I'm a former COO, CFO and school business manager, an experienced governor and trustee, and I'll admit I am a bit of a Mat geek. If you give me a governance model, a budget strategy, or a juicy centralisation debate, I am all in. And I've seen the good, the bad, and the how is this even still functioning side of trust leadership. And the idea for this series came out of a year's worth of chat with Abby and the team at Schools Advisory Service, the kind where we laughed, ranted, and realised that the one-off webinars that we were doing just weren't cutting it. We just needed something regular, real, and rooted in the messy, meaningful reality of trust leadership. And what became clear to us is that people leading in MAT need space to think, to share and to breathe, and that's what MATChat is for. So every episode in this series is a chance to slow things down and have the conversations that we don't always get time for about leadership, strategy, collaboration, challenge and change. We'll be speaking to people at the heart of the sector, asking the big questions, the awkward questions, and the ones that no one wants to say out loud. So how it's going to work today is I'll be chatting with today's guest, and you're very much a part of it. We're going to have a conversation. You can drop your thoughts, comments and questions into the chat box as we go. And at the end, we'll wrap up with a Q&A. So you can join the chat at the end and be part of the conversation. So let's get into it. Episode 1 is here and we are kicking off in style. Today, I'm joined by someone who knows a thing or two about what it means to lead, challenge and innovate in this space, Dominic Broad. He's currently Director of Education in the Midlands and host of the Olympic Mindset podcast. He's a former head teacher, government strategist and national lead for curriculum reform, and he's recognised for his strategic work across education, technology and sport. He's got big ideas, he's got strong opinions and the kind of insights that will make you scribble things down in the margins of your notebook. So let's dive in. Welcome, Dom.
Hi, that's a nice build-up. Hopefully we don't let anyone down today.
I was going to say, I'm managing expectations, so we'll be cool, we'll be fine. So on our kind of agenda today, we've said culture, capacity and change. So I thought let's start at the beginning. Let's start with culture first. And it's a word that we kind of throw around a lot that means something different to everybody. But what does it mean to you? And what has that meant in your leadership journey and the kind of cultural things that you've been leading on?
It's a great question and a big one to start us off. Absolutely, the 3 C's. I mean, culture for me is a series of behaviours. I mean, certainly earlier in my career, I did believe that the words on the wall, the kind of the vision, the ethos, that kind of PowerPoint presentation we get out once a year is the culture of an organization. And as I've got older and as I've got a little bit wiser and made more and more mistakes, I've certainly learned that culture is those behaviors. It's the series of behaviors that people do when you're not watching. So, for example, we talk about culture and when things have gone well and when things have gone badly. I mean, in my experience, I've learned a lot from the times that culture hasn't been sustained. So I look back on a particular time in my career where, you know, the cultural shift was massive. The improvement of that organization was massive and all external metrics told us what a great job we were doing. But shortly after I left, within a year, those behaviors, that culture started to unpick. And I think there's something to be said there for creating longevity and making sure that when you set up a system is more of a net rather than based on individual people. And I think that was definitely a problem that I never saw until I went through it. So now going forward, whenever I try to create a culture, it's all about creating a culture that is sustainable and sustainable beyond me. So whenever I talk to leaders across the trust or aspiring leaders within the departments that I oversee, we talk about planting trees that we'll never sit under. And what we mean by that is that we are creating cultures and we are creating environments where teachers can thrive, quite literally. I mean, our multi-academy trust is called Thrive, but quite literally thrive and almost tapping into that passion, that enthusiasm of the workforce that we have and making sure that we act as umbrellas for them so that they can behave in a certain way and be their best more regularly. So that means that culture is more sustainable across the board and it isn't reliant on 1 or 2 people enforcing that culture. So I guess what I'm getting at in a really long-winded way is those series of behaviors come from creating the environment where people can thrive and people can feel comfortable and confident, not from being enforced by policy.
The way you've described that is interesting because when we talk about culture, we normally say culture is set by the leader and leadership. And like you say, you set a culture. When you left, that culture kind of changed or broke down. So I'm assuming, therefore, that when you talk about, planting trees and being umbrellas, then that's about the whole leadership team and building a culture. You've talked about behaviors, which makes me feel like that's about modeling. Is that right? Am I going down the right track there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember speaking to a colleague about this once. The most valued I've ever felt in my career is when leaders or people give me time. And obviously, time is our greatest asset, right? It's something we will spend and never get back. So if you give time to somebody, just make somebody feel 10 feet tall if it's done in the right way, obviously. And for example, if we were to say as a trust, we really value our staff, we really value your opinions, and you mean a lot to us, and we're a family. I know people don't like to say that type of thing anymore, and in fact, we don't, but you see what I'm getting at. But yet, when somebody wants their one-to-one meeting, or when you've booked in a call, or when you've arranged to do something, you don't turn up because you're busy. We're all guilty of it. This happens. Schools are busy, busy lives. But if we don't find time to make time for people, the people that we work with, they don't feel as valued. They begin to feel frustrated. And eventually those behaviors become the culture, they become the norm. And those words that we once said become words on a wall. And that's kind of what I'm alluding to, really. If you say something, you have to do it, you have to be it. And I think that is something that we really try our best to do every day. And again, talking about culture, I mean, if you want to talk about it from a more detailed perspective and systemic point of view, I use the Cotter eight stage model to create a culture. So you have to create a sense of urgency. You have to let people see and feel the reason why you need to change, why it's so important to move towards a particular culture. So would you like me to give an example, if you like, which is quite pertinent because we're going through it at the moment? So obviously, as everyone on the call will know, the DfE has missed targets for teacher recruitment. I think it's 4 or 5 years in a row. It doesn't look to be getting any better. So what we need to do is we really need to tap into the passion, the enthusiasm of the workforce, retain our best staff, and make sure that we're nurturing those coming through. So from a cultural perspective, we're trying to let leaders see how important and vital it is to protect our assets, our teachers, our teaching assistants, because if we don't, we'll lose them and it's going to be incredibly hard to replace them. So that sense of urgency made leaders realize that, the frustrations we might sometimes feel, the things that creep in, the reasons why we don't do something, the reason why we can't find time to meet with somebody, we have to prioritize our people, because if we lose them, we're going to find it increasingly hard to replace them. So that was the sense of urgency we're talking about there. And then we talk about creating a coalition. So a coalition being a group of people that all act as the kind of the champions for this cultural change. So these are Cotter's eight steps. You can Google them. But essentially that second step, the coalition, is vital. And that is the thing I've learned in my experience is the thing that sustains a culture. Because if I were to leave tomorrow, there's 8 or 9 different layers of people that run down through our organization. That act as our cultural architects, and they are the people that stand for these values. They embody these values. They model these values day in, day out, regardless of whether I'm there or regardless of whether it's a learning walk. And those people really bought into the reason why it's absolutely vital to act a certain way, to behave a certain way, to take care of our staff, so our staff can take care of our children and provide the very best, because that's why we all got into this, right? It's children, to create opportunities for the children in our care and to make sure they have the absolute best environment. And I always talk to our staff about this as a dad. If my children came to this school, would I be happy? If you spoke to my children that way, would I be happy? And ultimately it comes from us at the top, because if we're rolling all the rubbish that we feel and the frustration we feel downhill, well, it comes out somewhere. And where does it come out? Sometimes, not always, but sometimes in the classroom. So we don't want that to happen. And then you get into vision. And this is something I think where I made the mistake last time. I was really all about vision. You can probably see behind me the book there, Start With Why. Massive fan of Simon Sinek and the power of vision and making sure everybody's on board with that clear vision and goal setting. As a former athlete, all about goal setting. But if you don't have the sense of urgency and you don't have that strong coalition and those cultural architects or spheres of influence, as they're referred to in then the vision doesn't matter anyway, because you're just talking to a group of people that don't understand the reason for the change. They're not bought in yet. So it's a lot harder to get them on board once that vision is set, if they're creating a vision that they don't really understand needs to exist. And then you can move through this, communicating effectively, empowering others, creating quick wins, building on the change, and then eventually embedding change. I could talk about this all day, as you can probably tell, so I won't take up too much time with that, but you can Google it.
It's interesting what you said, because we've talked about culture and naturally you've gone into change, and you talked about, like I said, the impetus for, changing culture. And that's what happens, isn't it? It's people think culture is the way we do things around here, which it is. But if we don't make active choices about, well, what we do and how we do it, it becomes something that is unintended. And like you say, that I like that phrase of, you know, pushing all of the baggage downhill, if you so to speak, because, you know, there's a lot going on in schools. And this idea about cultural architects as well, you're embedding it at every level of the organisation. What do you do, or what have you experienced in terms of barriers when you're trying to do that, in terms of getting those people on board and aligned and helping them get others on board and stay aligned?
Just to build on what you've said there, I mean, you're absolutely right in your summary. Excellence is not an accident. And to chuck in my podcast here, the Olympic Mindset podcast, interviewed a woman called Leslie Maxey, who you and I were talking about before we came on this call.
Yeah.
Her podcast, the title is Excellence is Not an Accident. And what she's talking about there is that everything we do should be deliberate, whether we're trying to be a good father, a good husband, a good friend, a good colleague, a good professional. It's really, really hard to accidentally be our best every day. Because it's so tiring, it's so draining, there's so much going on. So you have to be really deliberate in what you do. And something to take it back just slightly there, sorry, whenever we work with leaders across our trust, we start with them first. So what I probably should have said was the big change we've experienced across our multi-academy trust now is the chip management training that we've gone into. If anyone's unfamiliar with this, I highly recommend you check it out. Professor Steve Peters also came on my podcast, but but I'd read about his work back when I played in sport. He's a very prominent figure in that space. And essentially the idea and the theory behind it is that if you get yourself in the best place possible and you have the best habits and you have the best environment in your home life, your personal life, and please understand, I know it's not always that easy, but if you can get to the best place you can get to, you're in such a better place when it comes to work. And, you know, I think we've said this before, 13% of a child's time spent in schools across between the age of whatever and 18. So it's only a small period of time really they get with us. So it's absolutely vital we're at our best on those days. So yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add that as a bit of a caveat there before we continued.
No, that's great. Thanks.
Sorry,
So, yeah,
I forgot your question.
the obstacles. So you've
Okay,
got
yeah.
the cultural architects, like you say, it's throughout the organization. It's, you know, identifying leaders and helping them be the best that they can be to kind of get that across wide, like you say, not dependent on one person. But what are the obstacles that you've come across with this? Because I imagine it's good on paper, but people are people, aren't they? They're a bit unpredictable. So how do you kind of deal with either leaders that are falling short or not, you know, operating how you'd expect, or even other staff who just aren't getting on board throughout the organization? How does that work?
Okay, so I'll always come back to like models and research just because I found particularly I had a systems leader job, you know, on behalf of Welsh Government overseeing development and implementing change across over 500 schools. And I did that really early in my career. So probably a little bit of imposter syndrome. I really delved quite deep into the theory there, but also because, as you've just alluded to, I could see the reason for the change and I just couldn't understand why people weren't getting on board. So I became quite interested in this kind of this field. So I was trying to read up on it just to understand where they were coming from. And I think the thing I found that the model that really gave me peace of mind was the Kubler-Ross grief cycle or change curve. And that is basically saying that you have to move people through these 4 or 5 stages of change. And they, you know, they're making up of frustration, bargaining, and then eventually moving through to acceptance. And then the change is moved on. That really helped me understand the psychology of people moving through change. And you know, we're not going to sit here and go through all the reasons why, but of course, anyone can have a number of reasons why they don't want to adopt the change. I think we just as leaders need to accept that anywhere between 5 and 20% are probably never going to get on board, certainly not on the timescale that you want. So you aim for those early adopters, you aim for those 5, 10, 15% of people that see the change, can be seen as the cultural architects, that can come on board really early, and they'll bring a large bulk of staff with them over time. And that was something for me that gave me a bit of peace of mind when instilling change. And there's another model as well. I can actually pop it up because very, very fortuitously, I'm actually presenting to our leaders across the trust on this next week. So I'm sorry, I'm just going to pop it up on my screen because I can't remember it.
No, it's fine.
It's called the Lippitt-Noster model, and it's all about why change fails. So we're literally talking about this with our leaders at the moment because we have a series of strategic targets that we're trying to implement across, you know, a number of schools, and we work with other multi-academy trusts also. And as you know, we've just agreed a partnership with Miami-Dade County. So we're trying to instill, strategic aims across a number of different areas, even in different countries. So some of our staff are now starting to feel that frustration. So very quickly, if we go through this Lippitt Noster model for managing complex change, there are a number of elements that make successful change. Number one is vision, clear vision. Number two is consensus of all staff. Number three is, do you have the skills, and do the people that act as your cultural architects, the spheres of influence, have the skills to implement the change? Are there clear incentives? Are there clear reasons why the bulk of people, the population, the staff have to get on board and want to get on board? Finally, resources. This is somewhere where change normally falls flat. And looking back at that role I held in previously, that was quite hard, because if you don't have the right time allocation, the right resource, money, budget, then it does fall apart. And then finally, the strength and detail of your action plan, a really detailed action plan where you can hold yourself and others to account for certain points or milestones in the change. And they're the elements that make up successful change. And basically what that model says is, if any of those stages are missing, there's a different type of failure. So for example, if the vision isn't clear, then there's confusion. People really don't know what they're doing or why, and they just start saying, oh, it's just change, I don't understand why, I feel overwhelmed. If you don't have consensus, that leads to sabotage. So, if the group of people aren't on board with why, but the vision's clear, but they're not on board because you never got the buy-in, you never created the sense of urgency, sabotage starts to happen. People start to fail willingly, or let things drop, or the behavior starts to fall apart. And then probably the worst one is, if the skill set isn't right, you start to get a sense of anxiety, a sense of dread. If people aren't trained properly to be prepared for the change, they feel overwhelmed, they feel anxious, and that's the last thing we want for our staff at the moment, especially, schools SAS, schools advisory service, taking care of the well-being and of our staff. That's the last thing anybody wants. So as you can see, those kind of steps, if each one is missing, there's a different type of resistance and a different point of failure in a model for change. So yeah, that's something we use and something we quite often refer to.
Have you implemented a change and then realised, actually, no, we're going down the wrong road here and we need to dial this back?
Yeah, of course.
And how did that go?
I think whenever you realise you've made a mistake, it's always best to just put your hands up really early and explain why. And in my experience, as long as you communicate quickly as you can, and as openly and honestly as you can, more often than not, yes, people will feel frustration, and rightly so, but they usually accept, especially if they can see that the reasoning or the rationale at the start was honest and true and had good intentions, and what you thought was going to be the right thing, everyone agreed with at the time. Is a lot easier to shift that change. Is a lot harder. And again, reflecting, this webinar is making me reflect on times where it didn't go well. I think of a time where it didn't go well. Okay, when I was a deputy head teacher, I came in as deputy head to an already excellent school. That's a different kettle of fish altogether, by the way. Leading a school that's already good or excellent is completely different to trying to turn a school around that is having a hard time. I remember trying to implement a change, and I hadn't quite got the more senior staff on board behind it. They were pretty easygoing. We were an already excellent school. They were happy to follow the lead. And then I had to step in and say, I'm sorry, I've got this wrong. And that didn't go down well at all. And that was because I never got the coalition to begin with. I never got them on board with why. I just said, oh, can we do this? And they were used to following instruction. They were a great team. They just said, yeah, no problem. And then it was a lot harder to re-steer that ship. So I always try and get in really early, because it's much easier to turn a tanker 5 degrees than to make a full U-turn. So if you're just constantly changing and moving back and forth and making those small tweaks and small changes as and when you can, then I usually find you're forgiven, and people can move forward and get over it a lot quicker, get through the Kubler-Ross cycle a lot quicker.
It's interesting just listening to you talk, because the way that you speak, you started with the story of, when you were ahead and you had a culture, and then when you left and it fell. Everything you're saying now is all about the team from top to bottom, communication, transparency. That's a culture in itself, isn't it? It's not hero leadership, it's human leadership, isn't it? In terms of being fallible and taking people with you and talking things through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the difference between being a manager and a leader as well. I mean, I was probably a good manager, and that's why I came through the profession quite quickly in those positions. I was organised. I was good at motivating others. I was good at holding people to account. Happy to pick up all the extra work for very little or no money. early in my career. And I just built a good skill set around that. Whereas leading, you're absolutely right. I mean, something I was taught quite a while ago that really rung true with me was that when you get to these positions and you get the name on the door or the office and you think you've made it, well, actually, you realize that no one really listens. People come to
No.
you, just because you have the office and the title doesn't mean that people will do what you say. They,
Mhm.
in fact, come to you and want you to solve the problems. They want you to listen to them. They want to feel valued. And I learned really quickly that the power is very much with the people, but the decision making should come from you. So, for example, this I've seen some people delegate all responsibility for direction of an organization or strategy of an organization to a committee. And I think, what's that famous saying? A horse designed by committee is a zebra. And there's there's something true in that, though, right? When a group
Mm.
of people are trying to agree on something, it's incredibly hard because there's a multitude of reasons and factors that drive each person in that room, and you're never quite sure why. And I think if you've got into a position of leadership and you really do see that as not your organization, but something you're passing through, something that you want to leave in a better place than you found it, and eventually you'll hand it to somebody else, you really do start to see it from a more servant leadership perspective. So I no longer see my role as dictating to others or leading or being that hero leader that drives change forward. I see myself as somebody that creates the parameters for others to work within. So
Mm.
if we've got time, I could do a quick activity actually. If people are listening, they can do this. I mean,
Okay,
it's
go on.
sorry, I
I'm
can't. You,
intrigued. This is not planned. I've
yeah,
got no idea what's going to happen, but let's go for
you can.
it.
You can't take the teacher out of me. Sorry. So if you've got a pen and paper, if you've got a phone, or if you're good at mental maths, we're going to do a very very quick task, just a quick number of questions. It will lead us to an answer, and then it'll lead really nicely into the convoluted answer I was just going to give to Laura. Okay, so pick a number between 1 and 10.
I'm doing
Multiply.
this.
Yeah, do it. Multiply that number by 9. Now, if you've got a 2-digit number, I want you to break those 2 digits apart and add them
Okay.
together. And now add them together. So those 2 digits should have a total. And then take away 5, subtract 5. Now, this is the tricky bit. That number needs to correlate to the alphabet. So I'll give you a second with this one. So A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, and so on and so on.
Okay.
Hopefully your
I'm
maths is,
really
hopefully your
intrigued.
maths is correct because this is live.
I'm double checking my workings.
So think of a European country that starts with that letter. And then finally take the second letter of that country's name and think of an animal, particularly a grey animal that starts with that letter. And
Seriously.
hopefully you've got a grey elephant from Denmark.
Oh, okay. I do. I have a grey elephant. I have a grey elephant.
There you go. So a grey elephant from Denmark. And that is an example of what I see to being a leader. That is I've created a series of tasks and instructions there that lead you to an answer that I know you're going to come to. That's a
Okay.
predetermined answer. You're going to come to the grey elephant from Denmark. And I can take words out, I can take instructions out. So for example, I said European country. I could have just said country, which might have led you to say Dubai, which
Mhm.
obviously you is a different animal altogether. And also I've said a grey animal because I've also had somebody say emu. So I wanted you to say grey elephant from Denmark for the purposes of this experiment.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of what I see my role as being. I have an idea of where, or we, my team, we have an idea of where we want the organization to head. We don't quite know exactly what that's going to look like in 5 years, but we know loosely it needs to look like a grey elephant from Denmark. However, you can tighten the policy or the system as much as you need, or you can relax it as much as you need to allow for freedom within that. So I could have taken those two instructions out and allowed you to say, as I've had before, a blue elephant or an emu or whatever. But I didn't want you to because I wanted to demonstrate that this system check works. But you can see what I'm getting to there. As a leader, I don't see our job as telling people what to do. I see our job as creating systems and processes that allow and guide people to work towards a predetermined goal. So, for example, in our trust at the moment, we want all of our work around teaching pedagogy to be rooted in research. So, obviously, whenever we do any work, the research has to stand up. the research has to be quite, triangulated. We have to see that it's been adopted and adapted accordingly to the children in our different schools and settings, because each school is very different. So they have very, very clear parameters to work within. However, the creativity and the freedom is still there for them to deviate and move between. However, they can't ever go outside of the parameters of it has to stand up to high quality research, and it has to come into under the parameters of teaching pedagogy. So you can see that there's some clarity there around expectations. I've created the goals, but there is some freedom for them to go and find what works best for them. Because again, going back to other leaders I've worked with, when they choose things that they like stylistically or things that they've experienced and enjoyed, it doesn't stand the test of time, because then I might come in and take over from you and say, well, I don't like that, and I change it. Or I don't like using that, or I don't like the way it works. So we see this now, we bring schools into our trust, and we give an awful lot of autonomy to our head teachers, and rightly so. They've worked extremely hard to get to the top of the career, and they want to lead the school the way they want to lead it. But the kind of non-negotiables for us are the way that you act, the way that you conduct yourself with each other, the way that you support each other in our multi-academy trust. So if somebody's having a hard time, or if somebody's less experienced in their career, well, you're buddied up and you're expected to support and help. And if you've got a particular skill set and you're good or passionate about something, well, we're going to tap into that and we're going to make the most of it and drive it across the trust. But once we've double checked it's rooted in research and not just something you like or want to talk about or feel passionate about. So you can see where I'm getting at with that. It's not just about telling people what to do anymore. It's about creating those parameters and those kind of constraints for people to work within, but still finding a way to allow for creativity and freedom, so you don't remove all teacher agency, which is a really hard thing to do.
And it does actually therefore create autonomy and kind of, flexibility and ownership within the roles that people have in terms of their own leadership roles. Because all of this, I'm just thinking, we've talked about culture and change, but looking now at capacity, and you've talked about leading from the top, but what about the leaders throughout the organization? How do you identify who those might be, and that they'll be able to work within those parameters and monitor those parameters for other people?
Yeah, so I've got to give credit to my boss here, CEO Richard Chapman. He is very much a believer in creating capacity, and the capacity must scale ahead of growth. So as we grow, we should already have those roles in place. We should already have the future leaders ready. And he's kind of given me a blank canvas with this and said, okay, I know that we need capacity, we need leaders in the future. Off you go, make it happen. And so he's created those parameters for me to work within. I know I have to create a series of leaders. I know I have to identify and retain our best talent. And I also know that we need them to work and act and behave in a certain way, and not in a controlling way. I'm, putting the children at the heart of everything we do, making sure your staff are protected and valued, making sure that we have an open and honest culture where we can challenge. If you think of Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, absence of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment. Oh, I'm so sad that I know all these. Avoidance of accountability and inattention to results. They are the 5 things that we always try to avoid. Very clear goals, accountability at every level, and making sure that people feel empowered. So going back to what I said there about creating capacity beforehand, an example of some of the work we're doing at the moment, we have the head teacher training programs where obviously you've got the MPQH and things like that, but I don't know how other people on the call feel. I mean, people have got very varied experiences of an MPQH and those types of qualifications. They can teach you some bits, but they don't teach you the whole job. So we've got a bit of an ethos that I think it's the 70-20-10 model. So basically 70% of what we learn to do as leaders is on the job. I never really knew how to be a head teacher till I sat in that office, and the first month it was a bit quiet, and I thought, okay, I like this. And then the calls start coming, the boilers going, somebody's handed in their notice, Ofsted has called, whatever, all these things start to happen, and all of a sudden you start to find your way forward. So the other 20%, we've calculated that our leaders develop in those informal settings. So coaching partnerships, mentoring partnerships, buddying them up with somebody more experienced than them, that can kind of support them through, guide them through, and help them in those nuanced situations that you're never really truly prepared for. And then 10% of what we do is the formal training. So the training program for head teachers, we start with them. So with the chimp management stuff, how to manage your own anxiety, how to not take things out on people when, you're carrying a lot of weight. And I was a head during the pandemic, which was extremely hard. I found that really hard, if I'm honest. And working in the SEND sector, the majority of my staff and students were in a time where, I don't know if you remember, but back then at the start of the pandemic, everybody thought the world was ending, and
Yeah.
nobody really knew what was going on. And we look back now and, it's kind of ended and we've moved on 5 years later. But at the time, it was really, really hard to understand and to unpick why some schools had to come in, others didn't, and the injustice of that kind of triggered behaviors and emotions. But the chip management stuff and learning to regulate your emotions and learning to be the calm, stoic leader that people need during those times probably projected me forward about 5 years in my career, because I learned to stifle those emotions, or at least hide them, and let them out with my wife at home or my friends or on the football pitch, although I'm a bit old now, I can't play anymore. So we teach our head teachers to manage their emotions, in front of staff, but we also give them an outlet where they can come and talk. And we have clinical supervision actually in our trust. So we've got a team of therapists that provide clinical supervision to our heads. So they have somebody to talk to, a professional, where they can relieve stress, relieve pressure, talk about the weight of responsibility that they sometimes find in their roles. And then they get some tools and techniques and we move forward from there. And hopefully, at the moment, it seems to be working, but hopefully it works for a longer period of time. And we do value getting that right, I think. And that's the first step of everything. And then we go down through the layers. We've got deputy head teacher training programs, which also includes media training, because sometimes the papers will call. I had a phone call from BBC in my first month of a job for something that the head before me did, and I had to answer, which is not great, and you don't want to, but I wasn't prepared for that. So we give our deputy head teachers media training, and then there's obviously all the logistical nuanced stuff that you need to know as a head. And then we go down, we've got senior leadership training, middle leader training, which we've just gone through with Mike Glavin, who runs Catalyst Education. Great guy. He was actually the managing director of education in Wales. Great leader. One of the best leaders I've ever met and worked with. And now he runs this training program with our heads and with our middle leaders. And just does a really good job of give them the opportunity to work with a team and feel part of something, and then go back to schools and run a small project. So again, going back to my point at the very start of this answer, 70% of what we learn to do is on the job. Our middle leaders don't just come on this training program. They're allowed to go and meet with their head teacher and choose a project that aligns with the ADP, the Academy Development Plan, which has been triangulated by myself, our school improvement partners, and the head. So everybody is in agreement. This is an area that needs to be worked on. They can then pick up an element of that. They propose the project back to me and the head. It's signed off, and now they're going to run with it for a year. And it's kind of like a free run at being a leader, because if it goes wrong, it's absolutely no problem. This is a learning opportunity for you. It's a completely safe environment to make your mistakes. And also gives you an opportunity to say, well, yeah, this is for me. I want to be a leader. Or say, actually, and this has happened, actually, it isn't for me. It's too much responsibility. It's more than I realized. And actually, thank you very much. But I think I'm happy to continue to stay in the classroom and be the best teacher I can. And that's highly valuable for us, because we've got some excellent teachers now, and they're happy to stay, and they've tested the water, and they're okay with that.
There's a couple of phrases I wrote down as you were talking, actually. One of them that came through is leadership is lonely, but the way that you've described it is that you've made great effort to make it not feel lonely. And like you say, and also this idea of a safe environment to make mistakes, because again, like I said, I'm a school business leader on the other side of it in terms of the business side. You don't learn the job until you do the job. And that is a very unsafe environment to make mistakes, is when your name's above the door or your name is on the budget. So I think it's really interesting, that idea of not just having capacity, but the way that you support and scaffold it.
Yeah, the way that we lead, or particularly I lead, is probably based on the things I didn't like. I mean, if you look through my career, and obviously I've moved up relatively quickly, both in Wales and in England, and that was amazing. And obviously I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the challenge. As a competitive person, I like to challenge myself. I like to push myself outside of my boundaries. But some of the leaders I had were excellent, and obviously some did things, or I saw things that maybe I thought I won't do that, and that sometimes is valuable. So for me, I found leadership positions quite lonely, in that I maybe, being so young at the time, I hadn't quite established a network of people around me that I could go and talk to. And I did, as I came through that. Some really great people, Tristan Williams, who's now going on to be a MATChat CEO. He's a head down in the Southwest, and a number of different people that really reached out and could see that I was young and new and took me under their wing. But there were other people that maybe weren't quite as kind, and that's okay. That's fine. Everyone's different. But what I want our younger leaders, or even not necessarily young, but less experienced leaders that are coming into leadership positions for the first time to feel completely supported, and to know that there is no such thing as a silly question, and to know that if they get something wrong, well, we'll tidy that up and we'll help you and we'll move forward together, because we're all going to make mistakes constantly. It's just, did you make it on purpose? And was there obviously nobody ever does. And was there a clear thought process behind it? Sometimes there isn't. So my job is to teach you the thought process, the process of leadership, the process of instilling and implementing change, which so many people neglect, and then things go wrong and they don't know why, and then they're held to account, and then somebody might be penalized for that. So yeah, I look back at those stages in my career, and then we just try to create an environment where people can flourish without the feeling of inadequacy, those imposter syndromes, because we've seen so many really talented leaders. I think it's something silly, like 75% of people experience imposter syndrome, particularly women in academics. Now, we work in education, which is full of academics and full of women. So we're not seeing as many really talented potential leaders come through because they're suffering with imposter syndrome. So I see it as my duty to create an environment and opportunities, like I've just said there, with the secondee model, 70-20-10 model, where people can come and trial and test, and then hopefully we build confidence in them. And our last round of secondees were all women. We're all lacking that confidence to take the next step. They didn't want to apply because they didn't feel that they met every single step of a job spec, which they probably didn't, but they still could have gone for it, and they would have been overlooked. But instead, they've gone through the secondee model. They've trialed leadership. One of them decided to go back to class, which is absolutely fine. Every single other one was promoted up into leadership positions, assistant head positions in other schools within our trust, which is a different relationship challenge then, when you have to apologize to the head teacher for stripping away one of their best staff and they've gone on to another opportunity. But as I've already alluded to, we're doing these programs all the way down through schools, and now, and we've got a trust day on May the 2nd at Coventry City Stadium. If anybody listening would like to come, you're more than welcome. Just reach out on LinkedIn and I'll give you a free ticket. We have a series of events and training workshops which are being hosted and held by some of our teachers and leaders from across the trust. It's taken 4 or 5 years to get there. This didn't happen overnight. It's been a real effort to get it to this point, but it makes me really proud now to sit back and say that I no longer need to stand and introduce these concepts. I no longer need to stand and teach these things. We've got teams of people that are leading. And I met with them all yesterday, and I'm meeting with some of them today after I finish this call with you. I'm driving to one of the schools to meet them, and they're going to update me on their workshops, which they've all put together based on the parameters I gave, the grey elephants from Denmark, So we're going to see exactly what I hoped to see 4 years ago come into life now, with teams of people that have bought in, the coalitions that understand and have adopted this. And it's taken a life of its own, and it's so much better than I could have created it. I actually spoke to Mynheer Magalsi, one of our really talented heads in our trust yesterday, and I was saying to him, these teachers now are doing things that they're brilliant. They've surpassed what I'd hoped and what I know. So that's what you want, right? You want your leaders to be better than you were. So yeah, that's what we're aiming for, and that's what we're working towards as a trust.
Just thinking about what you're saying there as well, like, these leaders, they are growing, they are surpassing, and they are out there doing what you used to do. So does that give you more time to be more strategic? How has that affected your role? Because it's kind of the holy grail of leadership, isn't it? Because like leadership sometimes feels like a grind, but if you've got this excellent team, what are you doing? How do you keep that? How do you maintain what you've got and continue to develop?
So in keeping with my love of models, so we've got the forming, storming, norming, performing model. We've actually reached the performing stage of our journey. So, we've gone through the difficulties, we've gone through the challenges, we've hit that point now where we have teams of people instilling the change that we want to see. It doesn't stand still, does it? That was these strategic priorities, these grey elephants from Denmark, were things that in my area, in my field of work, that I set 4 years ago. So it's now time to look ahead at another 4 years and say, okay, I might not be here, or I might, but these are the things we're working towards. And I mean, the good thing about this now is I have a team of people around me that all understand what we're working towards. They're all really bought into what we're trying to create. They all see the importance of working together. And, probably the greatest achievement, I hope everyone feels this way, and probably not everyone, but I hope they do, is that I used to feel, and some of my colleagues used to feel, that we were being held to account for things we weren't responsible for. And that's a really hard pill to swallow. If somebody's telling you exactly how to do your job and then holding you to account for it, it's kind of like, well, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
So I'm doing what you tell me to do, and if I get it wrong, you will fire me. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember actually having that conversation with somebody in a senior position. I'm not going to name them, but I remember saying, absolutely not. If I'm going to fall on a sword, I'll be falling on my sword, not on yours. And that that was a real growth moment for me, because it took a long time to get to my place in my career, to have the bravery to say that. And that's something we're working really hard on too. We want our leaders to feel that they are responsible for their journey. They are responsible for their schools. They're responsible for the things that they do. And then also they hold accountability, because of course they do. We all need to hold accountability, as do I. And I make sure that I, to use a probably crass phrase, put my neck on the line with the heads. So I attend the Ofsted meetings with them. I make sure that, you know, I speak to the board and I quality show everything that they do. So if something were to go wrong, it's we're in this together. We're a team, you know, we're in the same boat, paddling in the same direction, trying to get to the same goal. And if things go wrong, I'll do my best. I'll protect, and I'll say, look, I've authorized this, and at the moment that seems to be working well, because we have a team of really empowered people that are really motivated, and I've just found we've got a bit more honesty. People can come to me and say, yeah, I've missed this deadline, or I'm sorry, I haven't done that, and that's okay. You know, I normally bring deadlines forward anyway, because people always miss them. So I very, very, very rarely set a deadline on the actual deadline, so it's never a problem.
In terms of obviously we've got people with us today, and obviously in terms of when we share this as a podcast, in terms of people listening, what advice would you give them if they are starting out in terms of at the beginning of building culture or facing change? What should they do? And maybe more importantly, what should they really not do? Because I don't think we speak about that enough.
I think it goes back to what I've already alluded to. I think it's sometimes thinking about what was good for you, what did you enjoy in other leaders, and what did you aspire to be, but also what did you hate. I mean, there were so many things I really didn't like in education places I worked, and you know, I'm not complaining, obviously. I'm making this sound more negative than maybe it was at the time, but I look back and there were things I didn't like, so I just make sure I don't follow those same patterns, really. I mean, everyone always says that, you know, we need to change, the system needs to change. Well, it starts with us, doesn't it? And the way that we act. And if just one person changes their actions and acts in a different way, or sets a system up in a different way, then it gives an opportunity for other like-minded people to follow those steps. And as I've already alluded to, you know, 15, 20, 25% of people may never come on that journey. That's okay. We're using statistics here to say that, well, as long as we can get the bulk of people happy, on board, enjoying their jobs, and within reason feeling part of what we do, then absolutely, that then we've done the right thing. So anybody starting out, I would highly recommend you start with yourself. Just, are you enacting the behaviors that you want to see in others? And that can be a really hard discussion sometimes. You know, do you make eye contact with people? Do you make them feel valued? Do you light up when a child comes in the room? Do you prioritize children? I mean, these are all silly things, but I've worked with leaders that have been telling me how much they value children. And then there's a child knocking on the door and they're like, oh, can you come back and speak into Dominic? And I'm like, no, no. Like, but the child comes in absolutely fine, you know, and that's the way I want us to work. I'm not saying that's the right or the wrong way. That's the way I want to work, and that's the way I want to be perceived, and that's the way I want our leaders to act. And my colleagues around me all agree. And as I've said, anybody listening might feel differently. They might disagree with the way that we act and the things that we do, and that's absolutely fine. That's your prerogative, wherever works for you. But just be crystal clear on what your expectations are, because the times that maybe there's this ambiguity for what people expect from you, that can create anxiety. So create those goalposts and those foundations for what you expect of somebody. And I give one more example. I've actually delivered a keynote very recently at a conference, and I was talking about culture actually, and what we expect from our leaders. And somebody said to me, I just want them to be their authentic self. And I kind of joked, but it
Yeah.
was semi-serious. Well, what if their authentic self is they're a bully? What if they're not a very nice person? What if, you know, they use demeaning language? What if they're, you know, a chauvinist? I don't know. You know, but the point is, if their authentic self is not okay, then you need to let them know that's not okay. So with us, we have very clear expectations for the way that we want each other to act, how we want to conduct ourselves around each other, and how we support each other. And that just creates really clear guidelines and boundaries. And hopefully that will instill over time and continue to um, come through as behaviors and continue that culture on. And obviously the culture will adapt and evolve over time, and rightly so. And somebody else will be sat in my seat one day asking for probably a slightly different culture, and that's okay. But as long as they're clear on those expectations and they enact those behaviors themselves and not be a hypocrite, then that's where you should start.
It's interesting. You said we've taught this wide-ranging leadership, and we've ended right back at the kind of a single person. And you've talked about that kind of clarity of your own expectations. And leadership is lonely. How do you, if you're in it, sometimes we can't see it, how do we find support to help us develop that self-awareness, or to be able to articulate those expectations about who we are as our authentic selves and what we expect of others? Like, what support is out there for those who are leading a lot of other people and need to kind of dial into that to be able to communicate it effectively?
Well, Schools Advisory Service, they've got a training package and they've got lots of resources on their site. My podcast, the Olympic Mindset podcast, to drop it in again. And there's loads of different programs and mentors. I mean, it's just finding the time. That's the hardest thing. The amount of times I've spoken to people that I just can't find the time. And I get it. You know, I've got 3 kids. I host a podcast. I've got a big commute. I oversee a number of schools. We've just set up this partnership with Miami-Dade County. I really do get it. And I haven't even mentioned my family and my friends and all of that. But if we don't find the time, then the situation we're in is just going to continue and exasperate and get worse and worse. So there has to be a cutoff somewhere where we say, okay, I'm going to prioritize what I need right now. And what I need right now is support, is mentoring. It's unpicking who I am as a leader. And there are some great courses out there. And, you know, I've already alluded to it. The chip management stuff helped me. That was great. And my Glavin Catalyst stuff, that's great. That's been great for me too and my leaders. Yeah, there's any number of things out there, and happy to connect with anyone outside of this on LinkedIn and send across a list of things that have worked for myself and for the leaders in our organization.
Like, say, I get it. Like, it's about finding time, isn't it? And people say that, but you're absolutely right. If you, again, if you don't find the time for it and you don't prioritize it, it's what we said before about culture. You're kind of leaving it to chance, and you don't know what you're putting out there. As long as you are conscious of what you're putting out there and making sure it is what you want to be seen and heard. That's the main thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've said it comes back to you as a person, because leaders set the weather, don't they? So they set the environment for others to work within. So it's really important that we get I keep coming back to behaviors here, but it does determine the decisions that we make. The decisions we make should be based on the things that we hold dear to us, the values that we say are important, and values come from behaviors. So yeah.
It's human leadership, not hero leadership.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got one more question before we throw it open to a Q&A, because I know you also have a podcast, the Olympic Mindset podcast. Now, I know you've interviewed football captains and gladiators and professors and Olympians. What have you learned from there, out of sector, if you like? What's one of the main messages or things that have kind of landed with you that you think, yes, and that you want to share that with somebody else in the sector?
Oh, I'm going to be cheeky and I'm going to do 2. So, number 1, I met somebody called Narina Ramlakan, Dr. Narina Ramlakan. She was the therapist for Chelsea when they won the Champions League, and she's an excellent public speaker. She taught me to prioritize sleep. Now, that is really hard because I've got 3 kids under 7. But when I interviewed her, I was really unwell, and obviously you can hear my voice is starting to go now. Typically, we're coming to Easter. We've just had a number of inspections as well, so I'll forgive myself for this. But she noticed that I was getting ill. We were coming to the holiday. I always interview during school holidays and all weekends. And she just gave me a few tips and techniques that I could take away to monitor my sleep, to be better with my sleep. Putting the phone away at a certain time, using blue light, not scrolling as soon as I wake up, not scrolling before I go to bed. All these types of things that everybody knows, but we do anyway because we think, I'm just going to quickly check my emails, or I'm quickly going to check Instagram or whatever. It's such a bad habit, and it got me into such a terrible habit, and it really helped my health, and it helped me feel, I don't know if it's, a psychological thing, but I felt more clarity, I felt healthier, I felt happier, and that was a great piece of advice. And the other one, very, very quickly, was Joe Foster, who was the founder of Reebok, which, as you probably know, went from 0 to 4 billion valuation. Unbelievable person, fascinating man, in his 80s, reflecting on his life. And he told me that the most important thing in your life is to identify who the gatekeepers are, personally and professionally. So working out where you want to be personally and professionally is very hard, so I'm not even going to get into that. But if you've even got the slightest inclination of where you want to be on either side of that fence, then you have to identify the gatekeepers. So who are the people that can open the door to allow you to get to where you want to be, to help you get to that version of a future success that you see ahead of you? And then the most important factor in all of that is to provide value to them, because it's not enough to just be nice to somebody, to schmooze somebody. Everyone is nice to people in leadership positions unless, you're a horrible leader. But, I'm sure you found it too, Laura, as you progress through your career. Everyone's nice, everyone's polite, everyone's respectful. Well, what's the difference between somebody being nice and trying to schmooze you and somebody that has a real value or a real skill set that you can tap into, a real passion? So is making sure that if you do want to progress or to get ahead or to achieve something, work out who the gatekeepers are and show the value that you can demonstrate to help achieve a goal that is commonly unites both of you. So yeah, two pieces of advice that I've really taken into my personal life.
Amazing. I'm going to have to go and listen to more of your podcast now, I'm afraid. Your downloads will go up.
Yeah, hopefully.
Thank you so much. We could have talked about that. I know, I've still got a couple of questions, and I thought we could just carried on talking about it. But I'm conscious of time, and there are people on this call, so I'm going to throw this open now to a Q&A. So if anyone's got any questions, now is the time to ask them. So I shall press the Q&A button, and let's see what happens. You should be able to type in the chat box, is my understanding. Or there should be a Q&A at the side. Should I give it a moment? So it's the weird thing, isn't it? Are people typing? Are they not typing?
You'd like, while we're waiting to see if somebody does, you could ask you one or two questions to finish off.
I was going to say, actually, someone's just said, Claire has asked, what is the name of your podcast, please?
It's called the Olympic Mindset Podcast, and it's on Spotify, Apple, and now just recently been accepted onto Audible as well.
Someone said, will this be recording available afterwards? It was so useful. Yes, it will be. It will be shared with you via email, is my understanding. We have a question. How do you offer the same support and 70-20-10 to support staff, not just education staff? Thinking from school business leadership point of view. That's from David. Hi, David. I know David.
Yeah, great question, David. Honestly, that is something I accidentally neglected for the first few years. Received some feedback at last year's conference from some of our central team. So actually, let me just take that back. So the teaching assistants, I realized very quickly needed to be prioritized. In my third year, we started to employ some of these strategies and some of these techniques and some of the training with teaching assistants across the trust. But I was neglecting the admin staff across the trust accidentally. So I apologize to any admin staff, and I know, Laura, you were as well. And yeah, the feedback I was given last year was, this is brilliant, we're really enjoying it, but some of these workshops and some of these opportunities aren't available to us. So we've literally just started, and the reason I had some of this stuff available to hand, and I knew it so freely, is because next Wednesday I'm delivering a strategy session and a change management session, the first of the CPD cycle, to our admins across the trust. Centrally to begin with. Obviously, we're going to begin with our central team, and then hopefully it goes well. I'll receive some feedback. I'll hopefully get some ways forward and how I can improve, and then we'll probably disseminate that then via the people in the central team to the people in different positions across the trust, because they will become our spheres of influence, our change makers.
So it's a work in progress, but it's happening.
Yeah, next Wednesday it starts. So it's a great question, and I'll let you know how it goes.
Another question. Thank you for the input. We have a crisis with teacher recruitment. Is it worth looking outside the box and developing links with finding teachers from abroad?
Really,
that's from Ali.
Yeah, really good question. We have actually set up a few links with, there was a company called ANZ UK that we were working with for a short while, and bringing across some Australians who were coming over on work visas for short periods of time, and they were picking up roles across our trust and across some of the schools I work with, and that seemed to work quite well. Obviously, it's getting a bit harder with work visas now, because different things have happened in the last 4 or 5 years that just means it's slightly harder to bring people from abroad. But it really is a great question, and something that I think we need to look into more systemically, rather than, it was a bit of a patchwork quilt. It wasn't done systemically. It was just done via one or two people. So yeah, great suggestion. Thank you. I'm going to take that away.
Also, two questions quite similar. First of all, what was the conference event you mentioned earlier, which I think was the one in Coventry?
Yeah, so that's the conference I run for my trust. So it started with 80 leaders in Birmingham Football Ground, and then it moved to 500 staff in the Motorcycle Museum, and now we've got almost 1,000 staff, all staff across the trust. We give an inset day for it. We bring them all to Coventry City Football Stadium on May the 2nd. You'll have to let me know so I can book your lunch and food and stuff and book you and help you book the workshop. So if you want to come, let me know. If you add me on LinkedIn, it's just Dominic Broad. And then I'll send you an invite, and then somebody can book you on. You can choose which workshop you'd like to attend, and then make sure if you've got any dietary requirements. So yeah, you're welcome to come.
Okay, David, who asked the question about support staff, has also said, follow up, have you thought about allowing others to join your CPD? And I know you're doing it for Coventry, but do you do CPD services generally, or allow other people to come into other sessions that you do?
That's a great question. No, David, we hadn't considered that at all. I mean, this is the first, or one of the first times I've spoken about it publicly. I mean, also we wanted to make sure we got it right. It didn't, we had all these ideas 4 years ago, and it wasn't happening properly. It wasn't happening in the right way, and the quality was variable and the feedback was variable. But I feel like now, 4 or 5 years on, we've really got to a place where the feedback is really, really, really positive. We can start to see that those things are coming through. So yeah, I guess this would be a good time to think about inviting others in. So yeah, if you'd like to join, David, again, feel free, reach out. I'm sure Drew or Laura can put you in touch. Let me know what type of training you'd be interested in, and I'm sure we can find a way.
Amazing. He's messaged in the comments to say he'd really like to join, so I'm sure he will be in touch.
There you go.
Let me just check. I think, is that it for our questions? I think that's it for our questions. So yeah, thank you very much. That is a wrap on episode 1 of MATChat. So thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and you've taken away some fresh ideas and hopefully feel a little bit less alone in the madness that is trust leadership. If you like what you've heard, make sure you register for upcoming episodes over at www.schooladvice.co.uk/MATChat. You can find the full schedule, guest details and all the good stuff there. And our next session is on Thursday the 8th of May, where I'll be joined by Alice Gregson, CEO of Forum Strategy, to talk about the latest findings from the Being the CEO report, digging into 5 years of insight, evolution and what the future of trust leadership could and should look like. So thank you very much, Dom. Again, I've really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you so much for everyone that's joined us today, and we shall be back very soon.